Hello. In October 2010, the Health and Safety Executive, the HSE, published the guide HSG 168, known more commonly as Fire Safety in Construction. This guide has dramatically changed the way construction professionals address construction site fire risk management. So, what is the impact of HSG 168? Well, today we'll look at how the UK Timber Frame Association is setting the standards for the entire construction industry in delivering practical guidance right across the supply chain, from architects to contractors, paving the way for safer construction sites. Well, joining me today to guide us through this thorny issue are Martin Milner, Director and Technical Consultant to the UK Timber Frame Association, and Dave Berry, a fire consultant also from the UKTFA. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Hello.
Martin, let's start at the beginning if we may. In a recent poll, 90% of client groups said that timber frames were the most sustainable form of construction. Is that just sustainable or for that read also desirable, and why?
Well, they're probably responding to the context of the government initiative to reduce carbon emissions to zero by 2016, and that they're looking at the three key points of timber frame: that's sustainability, the performance and the cost effectiveness of timber frame. Sustainability, in that it's the only main green product. It's got a natural supply chain, and in terms of performance, we're looking at the proven thermal and energy efficient performance of the product. In terms of cost effectiveness, it's cost effective for the Code for Sustainable Homes, it's cost effective in off-site assembly, and it's cost effective through the supply chain.
So it sounds like it ticks all the boxes, but there are some issues, aren't there, Dave? Tell us what those issues are.
Yeah, unfortunately there have been a number of large fires on construction sites, so we've started to work with the stakeholders and the others involved in developing this guidance.
So Martin, is that site safe? That's a term that some people might have heard of.
There are three key documents which are presenting the drivers for this information that we're talking about. As you mentioned in the introduction, the HSG 168. On top of that, we've got the Joint Code of Practice by the Fire Protection Association, which is the control of sites to avoid fire during construction process. And also we've got the CDM regulations, where designers and constructors have an obligation. In terms of the information out there, is that we're looking to provide a consistent and reliable source of information to provide users that timber frame can be built in any location.
I want to come back to a little bit more detail about what's contained in the guidance in a minute, but Dave, if you'll just help me to understand who's been involved in developing these guidelines, because you have a large number of stakeholders and interested parties in this issue, don't you?
Yes, we do actually. Obviously, very early on, as I said, we recognised that there was an issue, there was a problem here for all concerned. And ourselves, UKTFA and the Chief Fire Officers Association formed up a joint working group to start to address this issue, approximately about 12 months or so ago. Actually, that group was very rapidly joined by other stakeholders, HSE, obvious one, the ABI, Fire Protection Association, Fire Brigade Union, and a host of others. Some 10 organisations actually sit round this working group table. That table now, as a working group, has been recognised by the ministers, both the construction minister and the fire minister within the department, as being the body now that's leading on addressing these issues.
So a large group of people.
Yes.
That sounds like a lot of tea and a lot of biscuits at those meetings.
It was, but I struggled through.
It was tough. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, and under all this, the UKTFA has got its Site Safe initiative and strategy, and that's the umbrella which looks after from the design process right through to the procurement and onto site.
Yeah.
And that's come through. It started off in a response to the HSE requirements and the CIFOA request for registration of sites, which Dave's just talked about.
Okay, so you've talked about the three parts of the guidance, the three phases, if you like. Let's take each one of those in turn, if we might. So let's begin with what you call the design phase, I think. Tell us in brief about the guidance for that phase of the project.
In terms of site safe, we are looking at, first of all, a risk assessment checklist to review the construction that you're looking at, the concept of the design, and from that point designers would use separating distance guidance, which we're going to talk about later on, in determining what is the appropriate form of timber frame construction for that particular site.
So sorry to interrupt, who is this first part of the guidance aimed at? Who will be using it?
From the architects, the planning architects, or project managers looking to see the feasibility of a project on site, so they can quickly establish the right form of timber frame for that site.
And then moving on to the second phase, which you've called on-site, who is that applicable to?
The design process requires the procurement and then onto site, so that all the different professionals within that chain are informed, and that's part of the CDM regulation, that you have an information flow from team leader to team leader. And on site, that's where site safe registration for UKTFA members comes into its own, and that's where the Chief Fire Officers Association and the fire service are informed of the construction on that site, and then they can review to make sure that the proper risk assessments are being undertaken.
And what's especially different about this phase? What is in the guidance that people will perhaps be surprised by?
I think it has particular relevance to the fire service, because it is that during that construction phase that timber frame in particular can be susceptible to fires. And Martin's just said part of the process is for the supply chain, whoever within the organisation, informing the fire service through the risk assessment, the risk registration process, where the site is, providing a whole host of other information, and the fire service then is not only aware of the site, they can review their existing procedures for addressing that site. Should there be an incident on that site, so they are better organised, better identified in terms of the nature of the actual risk on the site. So there's actually quite a bit of information there aimed at the designer and aimed at the end of the day the constructors and the fire service, bringing them all together, not as separate bodies, but all of them having a role in managing the risk.
Yeah, so this design guide for separating distances that we're going to talk about is part of a suite of documents, and for the construction site aspect, we've got to be looking at three areas. One is stopping a fire happening in the first place by site security, and there is plenty of UKTFA guidance and supporting documents on that. The second thing is to stop ignition of a fire should that occur by accident or by arson. And the third phase is what is the impact of a fully developed fire to the neighbouring buildings, and this is what this separating distance guidance is all about, is to demonstrate to end users, developers, the supply chain and architects and designers that what is the appropriate separation distance between buildings as you're constructing.
Okay, let's move on to the third phase of the guidance, which you're calling the in-service phase. Tell us about that.
Despite the facts that timber frame in service has proven itself not to be at risk of fire through to the protection procedures, the guidance living in a timber frame building is there to show maintenance officers and the like what they are to look out for if they were to remove panels or gain access to the construction.
Okay. Well, that's an excellent overview. Let's look now in a little bit more detail at how the guidance is going to be used in practice by the various stakeholders. And I think what might be useful there is to ask some of the questions that are commonly asked by some of these stakeholders. So talk us through how the guidance is going to be implemented. And you've referred to these documents, and here we have them, beautifully arranged on the table. Talk us through how people are going to use them and how they get access to them.
Right. The separated guidance documents here are going to be available on the UKTFA website. They are a working document, and that means that we're going to be updating them as we get more information and more supporting data. The information contained within them at the moment is very much based on test evidence and test information that we've collected over the last 6 months, and the way they're set out is, first of all, an introduction to explain in part one what the background of it is, why they're here, and indeed what the contents of these documents are, and any supporting information needed by fire engineers or risk assessors. And then we go into the meat of part two and part three. Part two is for standard timber frame. That's the timber frame construction techniques that we're familiar with, and the construction methods to mitigate a risk of fire spread from one building to the next. And part three is about the enhanced or fire reduction measures you can put within the timber frame itself to reduce the spread of fire.
Okay. A question that has also been asked is, does the guidance mean that some standard timber frame is not appropriate now?
I think the answer will be that in certain scenarios, some of the existing construction techniques for timber frame won't be appropriate. But that's fully explained in the guidance. The limits of different types of structures are fully explained in terms of, especially in terms of the separating distances that are necessary if you want to use these particular types of construction. But our objective and the objective of the guidance is, without doubt, that you can use timber frame construction anywhere, at any time. It's just you've got to make sure that your type of construction that you're using is appropriate in the circumstances.
Yes, and that's why it's divided into the parts. You've got part two, which covers standard timber frame, and what are the mitigation measures you have to undertake for that, and part three, where you've got supply chain products which will enhance the fire resistance of the timber frame, but also for awkward, difficult sites, particularly inner city sites where you're built up and you want to build very close to a neighbouring building, and there are techniques in there to show you what's appropriate.
Okay. Another question here. What if somebody doesn't have an adequate timber frame solution that meets the fire resistance that you've just been describing and is in the guidance? Where does that leave their business?
The answers are all in the guidance, in that there are no situations where you cannot build timber frame. The research and information we've undertaken is to ensure that we've got a solution for every site condition, and the supply chain can determine whether or not to instigate a product as part of their range to provide the solution, or work with the constructor to look at alternative approaches within the construction method.
I mean, you're sounding very optimistic here. It's almost sounding as if timber frame is ahead of other construction methods when it comes to managing the fire risk, or is that overstating the case?
In my view, we probably are, because we are now addressing the issue, and it's not just a side issue now as far as the UKTFA is concerned. It is a primary issue. It's come to the front of it, their thinking, not only their products and their systems and the processes, but now actually how does that all fit in as addressing the risk as part of that problem, the fire risk in particular. So I think, yes, UKTFA, in the documents that we've already referred to, in some of the other background information that is available in our system, I think we are addressing the risk and we are ahead of the other systems.
Yes, I agree with that.
How are you going to disseminate this information? How are you going to make sure that the guidance is adopted widely?
Well, we have a launch where we're presenting it to key stakeholders, the insurance companies and the health and safety executive and the fire service persons. But more importantly, this has to be disseminated amongst the designers and the decision makers for the construction build method. This will be widely promoted by the UK Timber Frame Association. With its members, they will be able to present supporting documentation that they have answers to deliver the right solution, the timber construction that they're after.
Okay. It's all very well putting the guidance out there and recommending that people adopt it, but out there in the real world, a contractor has asked, how can he be sure that his timber frame manufacturer has adopted the guidance and has implemented the appropriate measures to limit the risk of fire?
Well, actually, I can butt in there and say, actually, I think the answer is quite a simple one. Make sure you're working with a member of the UKTFA. So whilst all the guidance is going to be published, it is going to be totally underwritten, underpinned by the ethos that working within the UK Timber Frame Association. So if you're working as a constructor with a member of the UK Timber Frame Association, you'll actually ensure that you've got the right answers and the right solutions.
I couldn't agree more.
Now, you've explained it very succinctly, but some may be feeling that it's a little complex, that some of the terminology is tricky. How are you going to make sure that it is communicated in as easy a fashion as possible?
Well, we do hope that we've managed to break it down into digestible chunks, and that we will see when you look through the guidance that indeed it has a number of diagrams, it has a simplicity to it, deliberately so because of the complex nature of the radiant heat flux that we're trying to assess from one building to the next.
We'll be working with the fire service as well to make sure that the guidance is taken out into their membership out there in the service in the most practical way. We'll be working with them to help them achieve that, and we will be having some discussions very near future about appropriate ways of doing that, but we've promised and committed ourselves to assisting the fire service in delivering it to its members.
Okay, final question, and both of you on the spot. You've obviously done a very thorough job. Are you confident that you've done everything you can to ensure that you limit the risk of fire and fire spread going forwards in timber construction?
We've engaged with expert fire consultants, and we've engaged with the stakeholder community to ensure that we've delivering what we believe to be appropriate information. We will gain more experience. We will be undertaking further testing, and we will learn from that testing. We will always learn, and this guidance will be updated from that information we get.
And that's important. This is evolving, is developing the whole time. We haven't shut the door. We haven't said that's the end. This is the state of the art where we are now, and I'm confident that we'll actually learn from, as Martin says, the further work that we intend to do together with the rest of the stakeholders around our timber frame working groups, and we will actually get that information out there, and it will just develop over the next year or two.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming in to explain it to me. Very interesting. Hope you found it interesting too. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.